Hey, welcome back to another night of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're continuing our little mini series on incident response, and tonight we're going to move on to part four, and we're going to cover containment and eradication. So, previously we talked about the earlier steps, right? Preparation is what we're doing right now. It's the training, it's the planning, it's the learning the methodology, it's the putting together an IR plan, all that good stuff. Step two of the SANS incident response cycle is about identification, where we talked about really scoping an environment. Once we know there's an incident, we're trying to figure out exactly what's going on. We talked about those four real pieces of the puzzle that we're trying to solve. We need to know how the bad guy got in. So, what was their initial access point? We need to know what their persistence method was, or how do they plan to get back in if that initial access got sealed up, right? If they used phishing to get in, did they drop some type of malware in order to get a backdoor into your network? Did they create a new user account somewhere so they could VPN in or RDS in or connect through a VDI system that they found open? What was their plan for getting back into the environment? Uh, were they able to move around laterally through your environment? So if they were able to, get onto a workstation because they had a compromised credential via phishing, were they able to move off that workstation and get onto a server or get onto another workstation or get into an application and elevate their permissions? Or how are they able to move around? I mean, even to a router or a switch or a firewall, like where were they on the network? And then ultimately, why were they there? Were they there to steal data for the value of the data itself? Were they there to steal data so they could extort you as a business? Were there to ransomware stuff? Were they there to just turn your environment into a botnet? Like, what was the point? What were their actions? What were they trying to achieve? Now, once you've sorted that stuff out to the best of your ability, it's time to start moving on to containment, right? And again, these aren't perfectly linear steps. There's no ultimate, like, okay, scoping is now complete, move on to containment. There's going to be some overlap, there's going to be some cyclicalness, there's going to be some bouncing back and forth as you learn stuff. But containment is the step where we start actually taking action to protect ourselves, right? Up until this point, we're really just looking around and trying to figure out what's what. Containment is where we start trying to limit the damage of the attacker or maybe slow them down. We can start by isolating environments. So if we know there's some compromised systems, maybe we start pulling that stuff off to the side so we can investigate it. Maybe we start, taking things that look at risk and reducing the access to those environments or blocking them from more sensitive parts of the network, right? If you're in a PCI compliant network, as an example, and you see that, your DMZ is compromised, maybe you turn off the connectivity between the DMZ and the PCI compliant environment. Maybe if you see a workstation is compromised, but you don't really see a lot of other activity, you didn't see lateral movement to other networks, you just isolate that environment so it can't move laterally at that point. Now, these steps are potentially visible to the attacker, right? Depending on what you're doing and how you contain stuff, the attacker may know. So you have to be thorough in what you're doing and also kind of quick. You don't want to start sitting in these areas and then just waiting around. The containment steps need to be thought out ahead of time. They need to be planned and then executed kind of as you're getting ready to move at this point, right? As you contain, you might start seeing an attacker do something. You may find new things going on. As you put in new firewall rules to isolate a network, you might start seeing the firewall rule say, hey, something is trying to violate this rule that you didn't see before. And as a result, you have a new IOC to investigate, right? If you couldn't see the connectivity between, say, network A and network B, and then all of a sudden you isolate network B and you see a firewall rule saying, hey, something is trying to communicate to network B from network A, you need to go investigate network A and see what's going on. Um, you can start taking additional steps to prevent further actions, right? You can start looking for and blocking outbound data transmissions. You'll definitely continue doing things like taking forensic images and continuing your evidence collection and all that kind of stuff in the background, right? You're still going to be grabbing images. You're going to crank up the retention of your backups so they don't start overwriting themselves if you have retention periods and things like that. There's all kinds of steps you can start taking to preserve environments so you can continue your investigation. But at this point, you are also doing things like maybe disabling compromised credentials and resetting passwords and all that type of activity to really start limiting what the attacker can do. And the reason I kind of loop these things together with eradication is because a lot of these are also kind of eradication steps. Um, like academically, containment is about slowing and preventing additional damage, and eradication is really where we say, okay, bad guy, you're done. And we really cut the cord and we pull the plug here. So Eradication is a hard stop, right? It's we are done. We've scoped it. We are ready to get rid of this bad guy once and for all. And we're going to start patching systems. We're going to go find that vulnerability that they used to get in, and it is going to be gone. We're going to start removing malware from systems, not just seeing where it is and isolating the system, but we're now starting to blow away workstations that were compromised. We're starting to rebuild servers. We're starting to, cut off any kind of remote access if it was there still. And we're really hammering down on the network to make sure that we are getting rid of this bad guy once and for all. Um, Again, when you're going through these steps, it becomes a little cyclical, right? As you start, turning things off and rebuilding things, if you start that process and it results in restoring from backup, and you realize that backup was still compromised, you might have to circle back and rescope and do some of this work. So, the reason you want to be thorough in your scoping is to prevent those kinds of issues. If you know your initial access date was, let's say, I don't know, December 30th, you don't want to eradicate by rolling back to an old backup on, December 31st. It's already been compromised, right? Like, you have to figure out when that initial access was, so you know theoretically when your data is clean and you can restore from. Eradication, again, the next step here is restoring and things like that. Again, these things blend because to eradicate, you're rolling back to backup sometimes. That is part of the restore process as well. But ultimately, the steps here are contain. So you're limiting damage as you finish up your investigation, and then the investigation is more or less done. You're ready to go. Eradication is that final push to get rid of whatever allowed the bad guy in to begin with. Anything they built, anything that they left behind, any way they were trying to get back in and getting rid of it. And it's the last thing we kind of do before we start restoring data. And the reason we want to be really thorough in these containment and eradication steps is if we miss something here and we start that restore process and the bad guy still had a persistence method, they're just going to reinfect the network and you're going to start again. And that's kind of the trend in each one of these steps in the cycle as we kind of talk about it, right? Is if you do something incorrectly and you rush in your identification area or your identification phase, you're probably going to miss where the bad guy is hiding. And you're going to end up in a situation where you're playing whack-a-mole. And it might not be tomorrow. It might not be in a week. It might be in 6 weeks. The bad guy says, okay, they've calmed down. They've restored everything. This piece of malware is still checking into my command and control stuff. They missed it. They're going to execute again, and you're going to start the process again. They might have to look for another vulnerability since you did a bunch of patching. They might have to find a new system to lateral to. But if you didn't scope properly, there might be a bad guy still kind of creeping in your network. If you didn't contain and eradicate properly, there might still be a bad guy snooping around in your network. So you want to be thorough in each of these steps. And it's very easy to get impatient and just want to move forward because you feel vulnerable and at risk during this stuff. But thoroughness is what's important here. You need to make a clean cut and protect yourself long term. So if it means taking a few extra hours to just double check that, you're no longer seeing that traffic, or really hammering down on what are those connections that you're seeing on your firewall, or are these devices connecting into something for a reason, and investigating those things, do it. Spend the couple of extra hours, spend the effort, because if you don't, you get to start all over again. And that's a lot more work than you want to be in. And it's messy. So understand that containment is about slowing down the bad guy and really starting to isolate systems before this final eradication push. Eradication is about making that bad guy gone for good. Um, those are, steps 3 and 4 of the SANS incident response cycle. And that's the topic for tonight. In the next session, we'll talk about recovery a little bit. We'll talk about disaster recovery and incident and its relation to incident response, and then we'll jump into lessons learned. But for tonight, have a great night, everybody, and happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and happy Halloween. Bye.